The letter from the probate court arrived on a Tuesday, and I almost missed it entirely because my mother-in-law had already opened it. Not steamed it open. Not carefully slid a knife under the flap. Just tore right through it like it was addressed to her, like it always had been, like my name on the front meant nothing at all. I found the torn envelope on the kitchen counter when I got home from my shift. The letter itself was folded back up and placed underneath a stack of grocery store circulars. She put it back like I would notice, like I was stupid. I should back up. My grandmother passed away 11 months ago. She was 83 years old, and she had her mind right up until the very last week. Sharp, funny, the kind of woman who remembered the name of every nurse on her floor and asked about their kids by name. She called me the week before she died and told me she loved me and that she'd made sure I was taken care of. I didn't think much about that last part. At the time, I was too busy trying not to cry on the phone. What she left me was the house. The house where I grew up, a 3-bedroom craftsman in a neighborhood that had gotten expensive. Without anyone in my family quite realizing it, the estate attorney told me it had been appraised at $412,000. She put it in a trust 15 years earlier, updated it twice, and left it solely to me. No one else. Just me. My husband's family found out within the week. I don't know how. I hadn't told them, and my husband said he hadn't either, but someone talked because my mother-in-law called me on a Thursday afternoon, very calm, very pleasant, and said she was so sorry about my grandmother, and wasn't it wonderful that I'd be coming into some stability. That word, stability. She said it like she was handing me something. My husband and I had been married for 6 years. We lived in the house that we rented from his uncle, a detail that had always made me uncomfortable, though I told myself it was practical. His mother lived 40 minutes away, and she was there every Sunday without fail. She cooked. She rearranged things in my kitchen. She called my husband by a nickname I was never invited to use. She was not cruel exactly. She was something worse. She was certain she knew what was right. Certain the family resources should be managed by the family. Certain that my grandmother's house, my house now, was a family asset. The first time she brought it up directly was about 6 weeks after the funeral. We were at Sunday dinner, and she mentioned casually that her nephew was looking to invest, and that a house like my grandmother's in that neighborhood would be a smart partnership. She used the word partnership. I said I hadn't made any decisions yet. She nodded and changed the subject. The second time was a month later. She'd spoken to a real estate attorney, not my attorney, her own contact, and wanted to share some information about the tax implications of holding inherited property. She had printed out documents. She slid them across the table to me. I thanked her and left them there. My husband didn't say anything either time. I told myself he was just being polite. I told myself a lot of things. Then came the letter. I smoothed it out on the bathroom counter with the door locked. It was from the probate court. It referenced my grandmother's estate. It said that a petition had been filed, a petition to contest the distribution of the trust, and that I was being notified as the named beneficiary. I sat down on the edge of the tub. The petition had been filed by my father-in-law. I hadn't even known he was involved. He stayed out of things, mostly came to Sunday dinners, watched football, said little, but his name was on the filing, and the petition claimed that my grandmother had been subject to undue influence at the time she updated her trust, influence from me, and that The distribution should be reviewed by the court. Undue influence from me on my 83-year-old grandmother who had updated that trust when I was 22 years old and living 3 states away. I didn't call my husband first. I want to be clear about that. I learned something from every story I'd ever heard about women who made that mistake. I called my attorney. Her name was MS Doherty. I'd hired her 2 months after my grandmother passed on the advice of a friend who told me that inherited property and in-laws were a combination. That required legal representation. I'd thought at the time that was paranoid. I made the appointment anyway. Ms. Doherty answered on the second ring. I read her the letter out loud. There was a pause. When was the petition filed? She asked. I checked. The date on the document. 11 days ago. Another pause. And you're just now receiving the letter? It was open before I got home. She didn't comment on that. She just said, come in tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock, bring everything. I slept in the guest room that night. I told my husband I had a headache. He brought me a glass of water and set it on the nightstand and looked at me for a moment like he might say something. He pinked. Ms. Doherty's office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown. She had diplomas on the wall and a plant on the windowsill that was extremely healthy, which I found reassuring. She read through the petition while I sat across from her and tried to keep my hands still. This is thin, she said. Finally, is that good? It means they don't have much, but thin cases still take time and money to respond to, which is often the point. She set the petition down. Do you know if your grandmother had any documented relationship with a physician in her last few years? Someone who could speak to her mental capacity. She had. Her doctor had been with her for 12 years. I had his name in my phone. Good. I'll need you to sign a release so we can request her medical records. That's step 1. Ms. Doherty folded her hands. Now, tell me about the letter being opened before you received it. I told her everything. The envelope, the circulars, the word stability, the printed real estate document slid across the Sunday dinner table, the petition filed by my father-in-law, while my mother-in-law had been asking me about tax implications. Ms. Doherty listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, did your mother-in-law ever ask you directly to transfer, sell, or otherwise alter the distribution of the estate? Not in those exact words, but that's fine. Tell me what words she used. I told her about the partnership. Comment about the nephew who wanted to invest, about the phrase family asset. I told her about the Sunday dinners and the rearranged kitchen and the way my husband never said anything. Is your husband aware of the petition? I don't know. I haven't told him. She nodded slowly. I'd like you to hold off on that conversation until we have a clearer picture of what we're dealing with. She paused. Is that something you can do? I said yes. I called my grandmother's doctor that afternoon from the parking garage. He remembered her clearly, said she was one of his sharpest patients, said she'd always come to appointments alone and ask precise questions and never needed anything explained twice. He was willing to provide documentation. He said he'd been her physician for years and had notes from every visit. He also said something that I wasn't expecting. He said she had come in about 3 years before she died and had specifically asked him to document in her file that she was of sound mind and acting of her own free will and updating her estate documents. She told him she expected someone might challenge it someday. She knew she had known someone in my life might do this, and she had planned for it. I sat in my car for a time after I hung up. The next Sunday, I went to dinner I hadn't told my husband about the attorney or the doctor or any of it. I watched my mother-in-law move around the kitchen. I watched my father-in-law eat and say nothing. I watched my husband pour wine for everyone and ask his mother if the roast needed more time. I thought about my grandmother walking into her doctor's office and asking him to write it down. I thought about her, knowing all those years ago that someone would try. I kept my face very still. Miss Doherty filed a response to the petition 2 weeks later. She attached the physician's documentation. She attached letters from 2 of my grandmothers, friends, women who'd known her for decades, who were willing to testify to her clarity and her independence. She attached a timeline showing that I had been living out of state when the trust was originally established and that I had returned only to care for my grandmother in her final year, which MS Doherty noted in her filing did not constitute undue influence. It constituted being a granddaughter. She also flagged formally the matter of the open court letter. I hadn't thought of it as a legal matter. She explained to me very calmly that intercepting mail addressed to another person is a federal offense, that it doesn't matter if you live in the same house, that my mother-in-law had opened a court document addressed to me, had not disclosed it to me, and had concealed it under other materials. She told me she was going to include that detail in a letter to opposing counsel. 3 days later, my mother-in-law called me. She did not mention the petition. She did not mention the letter. She called to ask if I was coming Sunday and whether I could bring that salad I made last spring with the snap peas. I said I wasn't sure about Sunday. She paused just briefly. Everything okay? Fine, I said. Just a lot going on. Of course, she said. And then, we only want what's best for the family. I said I knew. I didn't say anything else. My husband finally asked me to nights later if something was wrong. We were in the kitchen after dinner and I was washing dishes and he was drying them and he said quietly, "You seem far away." I turned off the faucet. I dried my hands. I sat down at the kitchen table and I told him everything. He was very still while I talked. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he set down the dish towel and stared at the table for a long moment. "My father filed a petition," he said. "Not a question." "Yes." Without telling me. "I don't know what he told you." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I didn't know about this." I believed him, actually. I'd had time to think about it, and the petition didn't look like something my husband would architect. It looked like something his parents had decided and had not consulted him on, because consulting him would have required explaining what they were doing, and they knew he would have had questions. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "My attorney is handling it. The petition doesn't have a strong basis. We have documentation." I paused. "The question is what you're going to do." He looked at me. "They opened my mail," I said. "That's a federal offense. My attorney has documented it. There's going to be a hearing. Your parents are going to need to respond to a legal challenge in probate court." I kept my voice even. "I need to know where you are." He was quiet for a long time. "I'm with you," he said finally. I didn't say thank you. I nodded. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning 6 weeks later. I wore the same blazer I'd worn when I signed my employment contract because I'm superstitious in small ways like that. Ms. Doherty wore gray and carried a leather folder and looked like someone who had done this many times before, which she had. My in-laws were there with their own attorney, a man who looked like he'd rather be somewhere else. My father-in-law didn't look at me when I walked in. My mother-in-law smiled reflexively and then looked away. My husband sat in the gallery. He had taken the morning off from work. I had not asked him to come. He came. Anyway, the judge, a woman somewhere in her 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, reviewed the documentation before she said anything. The physician's letter, my grandmother's proactive notation in her medical file, the letters from her friends, the timeline, the fact that I had been a caretaker in the final year, not a manipulator, the fact that the trust had been established 15 years prior, updated twice with full legal counsel, and that there was no evidence of any coercion at any stage. She reviewed the matter of the open mail with a specific kind of detention. Then she looked up. She said the petition lacked evidentiary foundation. She said the claim of undue influence was not supported by the documentation presented. She said the distribution of the trust would stand. My mother-in-law's attorney started to say something. The judge looked at him over her reading glasses. He stopped. The judge then addressed the matter of the intercepted court document. She said it would be referred to the appropriate authorities for review. She said it was not something the court took lightly. That was it. It was over in less than an hour. In the hallway afterward, my mother-in-law approached me. My father-in-law stayed back. She looked smaller somehow outside the courtroom. She said she hoped we could move past this. She said she hoped things could go back to normal. I looked at her for a moment. I think normal is going to look different going forward, I said. She didn't respond. She and my father-in-law left without saying goodbye to my husband. He found me in the hallway and stood next to me and didn't say anything immediately. Then he said, "I'm sorry. I should have said that earlier, a lot earlier." I nodded. We drove to a diner on the way home and ordered breakfast food at noon, which is something we used to do when we were first dating back before Sunday. Dinners and kitchen rearrangements and the word stability handed across the table like a gift. He ordered eggs. I ordered pancakes. We didn't talk about his parents. Miss Doherty called me that afternoon to confirm the outcome was formal and on record. She told me the mail interception matter had been documented and forwarded. She told me to keep copies of everything. I asked her what I should do with the house. She said that was entirely up to me. I drove out there the following Saturday. The keys had been in my possession for months, but I hadn't been able to make myself go back. It still smelled like her, cedar and something faintly floral and old books. The light came through the front windows in the same way it always had, in long rectangles across the hardwood floor. I walked through every room. The kitchen where she taught me to make pie crust. The back bedroom where I slept every summer as a child. The porch where she kept bird feeders that she filled every single morning without fail. Even in the winter, even when it was cold and her knees hurt, she had known someone would try. She had walked into her doctor's office and made sure there was a record, just in case. She had thought about me and made a plan. I stood in her kitchen for a long time. I'm not going to sell the house. I haven't decided everything yet, but I know that much. It's mine. She made sure of it. Whatever comes next, the repairs, it needs the decisions about what to do. With it, the work of figuring out how to hold on to something someone tried to take. I'll figure it out. I come from a woman who planned. That's not nothing. I keep thinking about my grandmother walking into her doctor's office alone. No one drove her. No one sat beside her. She went by herself, told him exactly what she needed documented, and walked back out. She didn't know if anyone would ever try to take that house. She didn't know if anyone would ever try to take that house. She just knew it was possible, and she prepared. That's the part one come back to most. Not the hearing, not the judge's ruling, not even the look on my mother-in-law's face in the hallway afterward. I come back to a woman in her 70s sitting across from her doctor and saying, quietly, write this down. I am of sound mind, and I'm doing this freely. She did the right thing before there was any reason to, before the threat had a name or a face. That's not luck. That's character, and it's the thing that actually protected me more than any legal filing or court response Miss Doherty ever put together. I'd be lying if I said I handled all of this with that same kind of clarity. I didn't. There were nights when I second-guessed myself, when I wondered if I was being too suspicious, too guarded, too unwilling to see the best in people I'd shared Sunday dinners with for 6 years. I sat with that doubt for a long time, but what I've learned, and I mean really learned, not just told myself, is that doubt is not the same as wisdom. Being uncertain about your own judgment isn't humility. Sometimes it's just fear, wearing a more acceptable face. What actually saved me was paying attention to the word stability set in a tone that meant something else. To printed documents slid across the table like favors, to a torn envelope under a stack of grocery store circulars. Those weren't small things. I noticed them, and I took them seriously, and I found someone who could help me act on what I'd noticed. That's not paranoia. That's a kind of intelligence that women are often taught to talk themselves out of. The intelligence of trusting what you observe. And then there's the part that was the hardest, staying in that house on Sundays, not tipping my hand, not calling my husband the moment I got the letter, not falling apart in the car after I hung up with the doctor. None of that came naturally to me. I am not a person who finds it easy to be patient when I'm scared. But I learned through this that steadiness in the middle of a crisis is not something you either have or don't have. It's something you decide to practice. Because the alternative is losing ground. You can't afford to lose. You hold yourself together not because it's easy, but because it matters. My grandmother knew that. She practiced it every single morning when she filled those bird feeders, even in January, even when her knees hurt. Small discipline, consistent effort, the kind of quiet persistence that doesn't make headlines, but is the actual architecture of a life that holds. I'm going to fix up that house. I'm going to take care of it the way she did. And when the time comes, if it ever comes, I want to be the kind of person who plans ahead, who walks into the room and says what needs to be said before anyone thinks to challenge it, who leaves something behind that no one can take. She showed me it was possible. That's enough to start with.